One of the first things that Pakistan and India do when the two states become independent, when the Brits decolonize South Asia in 1947, in 48, is that they go to war. And they go to war because Pakistan was trying to seize Kashmir. Why did Pakistan want to seize Kashmir? Well, Pakistan's founders promoted this notion of a two-nation theory. And the two-nation theory held that Muslims and Hindus are separate but equal nations. Now, many Pakistanis will learn in their schools that the two-nation theory meant that there had to be a separate, independent state for Muslims. I mean, unfortunately, like many things that Pakistanis learn in their schools, that's what's called a fiction or less generously a lie. In fact, Jinnah had put forward this idea in hopes that he could secure equal seats in a federal parliament of a united India for India's Muslims and Hindus. And the Indian National Congress, which became the party that led India, said, "You've got to be crazy. You're a fraction of our population. Why should you get the equivalent number of seats in a parliament?" And when they could not come to some concession about what a constitutional dispensation would look like for united India, and fearing that the British would back away from their decision to decolonize, basically the Indian National Congress said, "Fine, go have your Pakistan." And so the two-nation theory then became the justification for this independent state. And I'm happy to talk more about that for those of you that know a little bit about the two-nation theory. Kashmir was the only Muslim-dominant geography in South Asia. So Pakistan felt that because it was the home of South Asia's Muslims, that it had some right to Kashmir. The K, for example, in Pakistan stood for Kashmir. But they didn't have a legal standing for Kashmir. It turns out there were three princely states. They were allowed to decide whether they would go with India or Pakistan. And Kashmir was one of those states, and its sovereign did not want to join either India or Pakistan. He was holding out for independence. So as it became apparent that Pakistan would not get Kashmir, Pakistan began its first use of non-state actors by mobilizing tribal lashkars. When I talk to American audiences, we call that a posse. I don't know what Europeans call a lashkar. Any good translation for a posse to a European audience? Hordes? maybe hordes, I'm not sure. Basically, well, we'll use the word that they initially used was marauders. So contrary to Pakistan's preferred story that these were non-state actors, they were not non-state actors. They enjoyed tremendous support from the provincial governments of what was then the Northwest Frontier Province, as well as the Punjab province. The military gave them fuel and vehicles, and eventually, of course, the state itself began supplying these marauders. As the marauders converged near Srinagar, and they probably would have gotten to Srinagar had they not been more interested in raping and pillaging, the sovereign of Kashmir asked India for help. Notably, that he had signed a standstill agreement with Pakistan, so Pakistan is in violation of the standstill agreement. He asked India for military help. India says, "We'll do that," on the agreement that you accede to India. So he signs the accession instrument, and as the accession instrument is being ferried to Delhi, India airlifts troops. So essentially what India is doing is airlifting troops now to defend its sovereign territory. Once this happens, Pakistan's army officially becomes involved. I want to point out that in the beginning, a mid-level munitions officer is actually the pioneer of this fiasco. He starts out as a major. By the time it's done, he's basically a chief emperor field marshal. I mean, the ability with which he could inflate his title is really quite remarkable, given the duffer that he was. Nonetheless, this becomes the first India-Pakistan conflict. When this conflict ends, about 1/3 of Kashmir is under Pakistani control and 2/3 is under Indian control. So this first foray, you could say, was successful, right? Had they not launched these marauders, Pakistan would have no part of Kashmir. The second time, they basically do a similar strategy. They use non-state actors in 1965, and they're fortified with regular and irregular military and paramilitary troops. And this morphs into the Second Indo-Pakistan War of 1965. What we now know is that had India had better civil military coordination, and they had the army chief not erroneously reported that they were out of ammunition when they weren't, India could have prosecuted that war, taken Delhi, and delivered a decisive defeat to Pakistan. Generally, this is considered to be a stalemate. But since Pakistan started the war, and since Pakistan achieved none of its objectives, it's a puzzle. Pakistan does this again in 1999, right? This time it's actually using paramilitary disguised as mujahideen. But it's basically, the same strategy. Send a people in, we're lying about their identities, try to affect a territorial status quo, but in this case, they're defeated. The troops are actually repelled. Pakistan is at this point an international pariah. In addition to these 3 wars over Kashmir, Pakistan was also decisively defeated in 1971 when India intervened in a civil war and essentially broke up Pakistan. Pakistan in 47 had a west wing and it had an east wing. So after this war, Pakistan had lost half of its population and half of its territory. So by any definition, this was clearly a defeat. In addition to this, Pakistan has waged a proxy war. Now we can talk about what a proxy war is and at what point does simply engaging in nuisance, value, sabotage, and terrorism campaign, which Pakistan did since 1947, at what point do we call this a proxy war? But Pakistan had been doing that since 1947. The nature of it changes substantively in 1990 when Pakistan takes these battle-hardened mujahideen, for lack of a better word, and sends them to Kashmir. All right, so we have this interesting question. Pakistan keeps banging its head against this wall over subsequent decades. It's got multiple, goose eggs, and it's not achieving its objectives. Worse, in doing so, Pakistan is in fact imperiling the very viability of the state. Why do I